There is a day that changes how you see people forever. Not the day you get hurt, not the day you feel disappointed, not even the day you walk away. It is the day you finally see someone for who they actually are, not who you hoped they were, not who they could become, not the version you kept imagining when they weren't showing up, the real version, the one they have been showing you all along. And when that day comes, everything shifts, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, permanent way, like something inside you finally settles after being unsettled for a very long time. But here is what most people don't talk about. That day is painful, even when it is necessary. Even when it is the healthiest thing that could happen to you, it still hurts, because you are not just letting go of the person, you are letting go of the story you built around them. And sometimes that story is bigger than they ever were. So before we go into the 7 things that change when you stop romanticizing people, I want to ask you something personal. Think of one person you used to see through rose-colored glasses. Someone you kept making excuses for. Someone you kept waiting on. Someone whose mixed signals you kept turning into something deeper than they were. What finally made you see them clearly? Was it one moment? A pattern? Something they did that you could no longer explain away? Drop that in the comments right now, because I think a lot of people watching this have been there, and most of them have never actually said it out loud, so let's do that here. Now here is the Carl Jung part that makes all of this click. Jung said that we don't always see people as they are. We see them through what we need them to be. Our longing, our wounds, our hope, our fear of being alone, our need to feel chosen. We lay all of that onto another person, and then we fall in love with what we created, not with who they actually are. He called this projection. And once you understand projection, a lot of heartbreak makes a different kind of sense. Because sometimes you are not losing a person. You are losing a version of them that only lived inside your own mind. That is what romanticizing does. It turns a real, complicated, sometimes deeply flawed person into something more beautiful, more mysterious, and more meaningful than they actually earned the right to be. And the day you stop doing that, things change. 7 things, specifically. Let's go through them. 1. You realize how much of your pain you actually made yourself. This is the hardest one to admit, because it is easy to blame other people for our pain, and sometimes they deserve the blame. Some people really do lie, some people really do manipulate, some people really do use you. But even when all of that is true, there is often something else sitting underneath the pain, something you added, something you built, something that was yours, not theirs. You gave their silence a meaning it never had. You gave their confusion a depth it didn't earn. You gave their excuses a tragic story that made them sound deeper than they were. You turned them not calling back into they're scared of their feelings. You turned their inconsistency into they have a lot going on. You turned their cold behavior into they just don't know how to love properly yet. And that addition, that story you kept building on top of the reality, is what made the pain so big. Because when it finally fell apart, you were not just grieving what happened between you two. You were grieving the whole world you had constructed around them. Here is a simple way to think about it. Imagine you go to a restaurant. They give you a plain bowl of rice, nothing on it, just rice. But in your head, you imagine it will taste like the best meal you have ever eaten. You add the flavors in your mind, you build up the anticipation, and then you eat it, and it is just rice. Now, was the restaurant lying to you? Not exactly. They gave you rice, you added everything else. That is what romanticizing does. You take what someone gives you, which is often very little, and you season it with everything you wish it was. Jung would say this happens because of a wound inside us, a need to be loved in a specific way, a longing that is so strong it starts filling in gaps that reality left open. We are not doing it to be foolish. We are doing it because we want something so much that we start manufacturing it where it does not exist. But here is the important thing. The day you stop romanticizing someone, you take that energy back. You stop spending it on a story. You start putting it where it actually belongs, in your real life, with real people, or simply with yourself. That is the first shift, and it is a big one. 2. You finally understand that potential is not the same as character. This one needs to be said clearly, because a lot of good people lose years of their lives to this one misunderstanding. Potential is what someone could be. Character is what they actually do. And you do not live with someone's potential. You live with their character. You cannot eat someone's potential. You cannot trust someone's potential. You cannot build something real with someone's potential. You cannot feel safe with someone's potential. Potential does not call you back. Character does. Potential does not apologize well. Character does. Potential does not stay consistent. Character does. And yet, so many people stay in painful situations because they are attached to potential, not to the actual person in front of them. He could be so incredible if he just worked on himself. She has such a big heart deep down, she just has a lot of walls. They are not bad, they are just hurt. One day they will be ready. Maybe all of that is true. But the question is not whether they have potential. The question is whether they are using it to be kind, honest, steady, and real with you right now. Because if the answer to that question keeps being no, then potential is just a beautiful sounding reason to stay somewhere you should probably leave. Jung talked about this in a different way. He said every person has two versions of themselves, the self they could become if they did the inner work, and the self they are actually living from right now. And those two versions are not always the same person. The mistake a lot of us make is that we fall in love with the first version and then build our whole emotional life around waiting for it to arrive. You date the future version of them. You stay loyal to the healed version of them. You defend the better version of them. You make excuses for the current version of them. Meanwhile, the current version keeps treating you badly. A woman named Clara spent 3 years in a relationship exactly like this. She could see what her partner could be. She saw his intelligence, his sensitivity, the moments when he was genuinely wonderful, and she held on to those moments as proof that the rest of it was fixable, but the rest of it never fixed. The inconsistency stayed, the emotional unavailability stayed, the small cruelties stayed, and Clara kept using his potential as a reason to not trust what she was actually experiencing. The day she stopped romanticizing him was the day she finally said out loud, "I am not in a relationship with who he is. I am in a relationship with who I hope he will become." That sentence changed everything for her, because once you say it, you cannot unsay it. The day you stop romanticizing people, you stop waiting. You start looking at who is actually in the room with you, and you start making decisions based on that. 3. You realize your empathy was working against you. This one is for the kind people, the deep-feeling people, the ones who always try to understand where someone is coming from. There is nothing wrong with being like that. Empathy is a gift. But empathy without judgment, empathy that has no boundaries, can quietly become a way to abandon yourself while still feeling like you are being a good person. Here is what it looks like. You understand why they lie. They had a father who punished honesty. You understand why they pull away. They were abandoned before, and they are scared. You understand why they get mean when they feel small. That is how they were treated growing up. You understand why they are inconsistent. They have not healed yet. And all of that understanding is probably true. But here is where things go wrong. Understanding why someone behaves a certain way is not the same as accepting the behavior. And a lot of kind people confuse those two things. They think, if I can explain it, I have to put up with it. But you can understand someone's pain completely and still say, I cannot keep receiving this. Those two things can both be true at the same time. Jung never said that understanding someone's shadow means you should let it hurt you. That is not what psychology is for. Understanding a wound does not mean volunteering to be wounded by it. There was a man named Daniel who was famous among his friends for always seeing the best in people. When a close friend started treating him badly, small betrayals, broken promises, constant cancellations, Daniel always had an explanation ready. She's going through a lot. She had a rough childhood. She does not mean it. His other friends watched this for 2 years, and eventually one of them sat Daniel down and said something simple. Do you think she would put up with this from you? Daniel was quiet for a long time, because the answer was no, and he knew it. That is the asymmetry that deep-feeling people often fall into. They are loyal to someone who would never be equally loyal back. They extend understanding that is never extended in return. The day you stop romanticizing people is often the day you realize that your empathy was beautiful, but it was aimed in the wrong direction. It was pointed outward, at someone who was not using it well, when it needed to be pointed inward too. Feeling someone's pain does not mean giving them unlimited access to you. Understanding their story does not mean sacrificing your peace for it. Seeing their goodness does not mean staying where the harm is. That is a shift, a real one, and it protects you without making you cold. 4. You stop turning inconsistency into a puzzle and start seeing it as an answer. Romanticizing someone depends heavily on confusion. When someone is confusing, your mind goes to work. You start analyzing, replaying, looking for clues, trying to decode what they meant by that silence, that text, that tone of voice, that look they gave you. And the strange thing is, that process can start to feel like connection. You're thinking about them constantly. They are filling your mental space. That can feel like depth, like chemistry, like something important. But most of the time, it is just confusion, and confusion is not the same as meaning. When someone is genuinely consistent with you, there is not much to analyze. They say what they mean. They do what they say. The message is clear, and your mind is free. But when someone is inconsistent, hot one week, cold the next, warm in private and distant in public, full of big feelings, and then suddenly gone, your mind has to work overtime just to keep up. And for a while, that feels like depth, like complexity. The day you stop romanticizing people is the day you realize that inconsistency is not depth. It is a signal. It tells you the person is divided, unsettled, unable or unwilling to show up for you in a steady way. That is information. Clear, simple information. A woman named Priya spent 8 months trying to figure out a man who was warm every 3 weeks and cold in between. She convinced herself that when he was warm, that was the real him, and when he was cold, something else was going on. She tried to fix the cold version. She tried to understand it. She researched attachment styles. She read articles. She replayed their conversations, searching for what triggered the switch. Then one day, her sister said something that stopped all of it. What if both versions are real? What if the cold one is just as real as the warm one? Priya sat with that for a week, and then she stopped romanticizing him. Because if both versions were real, then what she was signing up for was a relationship with someone who was only sometimes present, and sometimes present is not enough. The day you make that shift, something gets quieter in your head. You stop spending energy on decoding. You start spending it on clarity. And clarity is a much better use of your time. 5. You realize that being chosen by the wrong person was never a win. A lot of romanticizing is quietly about ego, not just love, not just longing, but the specific need to be the exception for someone difficult. To be chosen by someone who chooses no one, to be loved by someone who is not easy to love, to finally be seen by someone who looks through most people, to be the one who got through to them. That fantasy is powerful, because if they choose you, after all of that, it feels like proof. Proof that you are special, that you are worth something, that out of everyone, you were the one. But here is the problem with that thinking. It turns love into a competition. Now you are not just trying to connect with someone. You are trying to win, to prove something, to earn something. And when love becomes something you need to earn, you stop asking the most important question. Is this person actually good for me? Instead, you ask, how do I become the one they finally value? And that question will keep you stuck for years if you let it. Think about what it actually means to be chosen by someone who treats you badly most of the time. It does not mean you are exceptional. It means you were willing to keep showing up in a situation that kept disappointing you. That is not winning. That is patience confused with self-worth. Jung would say that when we are chasing this kind of validation, we are usually not dealing with the current person at all. We are dealing with something older, an old wound, an old moment where we felt unseen or rejected, and we are unconsciously trying to fix that old wound through this current person. That is why the attachment can feel so intense. It is not just about them. It is about everything that came before them, and once you see that, something important happens. You stop needing them to choose you, because you realize that the choosing you actually needed was always your own. The day you stop romanticizing people is the day you start asking different questions. Not, will they finally see my worth? But, do they treat me well? Are they steady? Are they honest? Are they safe? Do I feel like myself around them? Those questions protect your life in a way that chasing validation never will. 6. You stop making people better in your memory than they ever were in reality. This one happens after the relationship is over. When someone is gone, your memory becomes an artist. It softens things. It cuts the bad parts. It replays the good moments on a loop. It adds music. It removes context. And suddenly, the person you are thinking about looks nothing like the person who actually hurt you. You remember the one night they were vulnerable, the one conversation where they really listened, the one time they looked at you like you mattered, that one moment when everything felt like it was going to be okay. And your brain wraps those moments in something golden, something irreplaceable, and you start to miss a person who, if you are being fully honest, was not that person most of the time. This is one of the most dangerous forms of romanticizing because it happens after the fact. You have already left. You already know how things turned out. And somehow you are still rebuilding them into something beautiful. A man named Marcus ended a difficult friendship after years of being let down by someone he cared about. The friendship had real problems: broken trust, one-sided effort, moments of genuine unkindness. But 3 months later, Marcus found himself missing his friend intensely. He kept thinking about the good times, the inside jokes, the early years when things were simpler. His therapist asked him one question: are you missing your friend, or are you missing the version of him that you needed him to be? Marcus could not answer right away, because both felt true. But the more he sat with it, the more he realized. He was not missing the person who showed up at the end. He was missing the person he had spent years hoping would arrive, And that person, the one he was grieving, had mostly existed in his own imagination. That insight is not cruel. It is freeing. Because once you see it, you can grieve more clearly. You can honor what was real without inflating what was not. The day you stop romanticizing people, your memories become more honest, and honest grief, while harder, heals faster than grief that is pointed at a fantasy. 7. You discover that seeing people clearly is actually the more loving thing. Here is where the whole video turns. Because when you first hear the idea of stopping romanticizing people, it sounds like giving up on hope, like becoming colder, like deciding to never trust again. But that is not what it actually is. Seeing someone clearly is not the opposite of loving them. It is the most honest way to love them. Because when you romanticize someone, you are not actually seeing them. You are seeing a version of them that you made. You have turned them into a character, a role, a symbol, a screen for your own feelings to play on. That is not love. That is a very beautiful form of loneliness. Real love sees the actual person, the complicated one, the imperfect one, the one who sometimes shows up and sometimes does not, the one with real limitations and real history and real patterns that do not always look good. And it decides, based on that reality, whether to stay or go, whether to invest or protect, whether this is a place where you can actually give and receive care in a mutual way. That kind of love requires something that romanticizing never will. It requires honesty. And honesty, especially with yourself, is the bravest form of love there is. Jung spent his whole career asking people to look at themselves clearly, to see their wounds without dressing them up, to see their patterns without excusing them, to see the gap between what they imagined and what was real, not because that clarity is comfortable, because it is the only place where real growth lives. And when you start applying that same honest clarity to the people around you, something shifts. You stop being disappointed as often, because you are not expecting people to be more than they are. You stop being confused as often, because you are reading what is actually in front of you. You start choosing better, because you are choosing based on reality, not potential. You start trusting your gut more, because you have stopped overriding it with hope. And the people who do show up clearly, the ones who are steady, honest, kind and real, those people start standing out in a way they never did before. They might seem less exciting at first, less mysterious, less dramatic, less like a project you can pour yourself into. But here is what you eventually figure out. Calm is not boring. Safe is not weak. Steady is not dull. Those things are what love actually feels like when it is working. And the day you finally see that clearly, that day changes your life in the quietest and most permanent way. So let's bring it all together. When you stop romanticizing people, 7 things change. You stop carrying pain that was partly made of your own imagination. You stop confusing potential with character. You stop using empathy as an excuse to let yourself be treated badly. You stop turning confusion into mystery and start calling it what it is, information. You stop needing the wrong person to choose you in order to feel worth something. You stop making your memories more beautiful than the reality actually was. And you discover that seeing clearly is not the end of love. It is the beginning of a better kind. This does not make you cold. It does not make you closed. It does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you start caring about yourself in the same way you care about everyone else. And it means that when you do love someone, really love them, it is based on something real, something they actually showed you, something that does not require you to fill in the blanks or explain away the gaps or wait for a version of them that never quite arrives. That kind of love is quieter, but it is solid, and solid is what lasts. So let me leave you with the question I started with. What was the moment you stopped romanticizing someone and actually saw them? What did you tell yourself to keep the illusion going? And what finally made it stop working? That is the conversation I would love to see in the comments. And if this video said something that felt true, comment this: I choose clarity over fantasy. That one sentence holds a lot. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.